pursuant to Oregon Administrative Rule 345-011-0080, any person who engages in unacceptable conduct which disrupts the meeting may be expelled. This evening's agenda consists of 3 rulemaking hearings. During the hearings, the council will be accepting oral comment. The council's rules coordinator, Christopher Clark, will preside over the hearings. If you are in the room and would like to provide comment on any of these rulemakings, please fill out one of the blue slips by the door and indicate which rulemaking or rulemakings you would like to comment on and submit to Sarah Esterson. For those using the WebEx, you will need to use the raise your hand feature at the appropriate time. For those on the phone only, you will need to press *3, which will alert us that you want to speak at the appropriate time. Mr. Clark will go over these instructions again for each rulemaking hearing. So the time for agenda item A, which is where we are, it's the 2022 Carbon Dioxide Emission Standards Rulemaking Hearing. Christopher Clark, FCEP Rules Coordinator, will preside over this hearing to solicit public comments. Christopher, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Grail. For the record, my name is Christopher Clark. I'm the Council's Rules Coordinator. And I just want to confirm that we don't have anyone in the room right now, so this will primarily be a virtual hearing. We did notice this in the agenda for 5:30, so I'm going to give a quick presentation just of the general conduct of the hearing and then an introduction to the carbon standard rulemaking before we actually open the floor to public comments. As Chair Grail mentioned, we will be conducting 3 separate hearings tonight. The hearings will be conducted in the following order. First, we'll have the hearing on House Bill 2021 and the 2022 carbon standards updates. Second, we'll have the protected areas, scenic resources, and recreation standards rulemaking. And then finally, we'll conclude with public comments on the wildfire prevention and risk mitigation rulemaking. I will open each hearing separately and then recess them and take comments on any remaining comments at the end. So please make sure that you provide your comments for each rulemaking during the appropriate hearing and provide separate comments for each rulemaking you wish to provide comment on. As I mentioned, there's no one in the room here, so I'll skip over that part. But if you are on the phone or on WebEx, please raise your hand during the appropriate part of the hearing. To raise your hand, just click on the little participants pane at the bottom right-hand part of your window, and there should be a little hand icon there. And you can press on that to raise it and then press it again to lower it. If you're on the phone, please press *3 on your telephone keypad to raise your hand and then *3 again to lower it. If anybody wants to give that a try right now, feel free to do so. Okay. So as a reminder, where we're at in the rulemaking process for all 3 of these rulemakings is we're in the middle of a formal public comment period for the carbon rules. The deadline for written comments was tonight at 5 p.m. Although I will note that the council has had a request to extend that comment deadline, so we'll get to that in just a second. For the other 2 rulemakings, the comment period will continue after tonight's hearing. After the council has considered all public comments provided within the comment period for all 3 of these rulemakings, the council can consider permanent rules with changes to adopt the comments, with changes to address the comments provided. So with that, I'm going to start agenda item A. Formally, this is the agenda item on the 2022 carbon dioxide emission standards rulemaking hearing. I have a brief introduction to provide some background and procedural history on this rulemaking, and then I will give a brief overview of the proposed rules. And hopefully that will take us to 5:30 and we can open our rulemaking hearing. So as background on the existing carbon standard rules, to obtain a site certificate, applicants proposing to construct or operate a carbon dioxide emitting facility including a fossil fuel power plant or a carbon dioxide emitting non-generating facility. The certificate holder under the current rule set must demonstrate compliance with the applicable carbon dioxide emission standard. Basically, how those standards work is that if the estimated carbon dioxide emissions per kilowatt hour of output exceeds the standard, then the certificate holder has to offset or otherwise mitigate those excess emissions. So far, all applicants have demonstrated compliance by agreeing to provide funds to the Climate Trust in an amount deemed sufficient to offset those excess emissions. And the required amount is determined using the monetary offset rate that's currently found in OAR 345 Division 24, Rule 580. With specific regards to that offset rate, the council may increase or decrease that rate by up to 50% in any 2-year period based on empirical evidence of the cost of offsets, and the council's finding that the increase or the standard will be economically achievable with the modified rate. The council last increased the rate in July of 2020. So that's part of the driver of why we're doing this rulemaking now. But since 2020, things have changed. In 2021, the legislature adopted House Bill 2021, which establishes new requirements for new and amended site certificates for fossil fuel power plants. Specifically, the bill and the new law, which is codified under ORS 469-413, prohibits the council from issuing a site certificate for a new generating facility that produces electric power from fossil fuels unless the council determines that that facility will generate only non-emitting electricity, and non-emitting electricity is defined in ORS 469A. And then second, it prohibits the council from approving the amendment of a site certificate for a facility approved before the bill took effect in a manner that would significantly increase the gross carbon dioxide emissions that would reasonably likely to result from the operation of the energy facility. So when we started this rulemaking, staff proposed and the council concurred with a need for this rulemaking. HB 2021 is effective without further council action, but the existing requirements and the new requirements are both in effect right now, essentially. And so we determined or recommended that rulemaking is needed to clarify the relationship between what's in rule right now and the new law that's in statute. Also, when the legislature adopted ORS 469-413, it did not define what level of change in gross carbon dioxide emissions would be a significant increase. And so we suggested that resolving this ambiguity through rulemaking may provide some additional certainty for regulated entities. It may also, help to have a more robust conversation outside of a specific siting process. And then finally, even though the existing carbon dioxide emission standards have limited applicability in the future, we recommended that adding additional updates of the emission standards and the offsets rates would still be justified, particularly to address potential incremental increases in carbon dioxide emissions that are still allowed under certain site certificates, and to address any future applications you get for non-emitting facilities which are not prohibited by HB 2021. So the scope of the rulemaking was basically to implement the new law and to update the existing carbon dioxide standards, and with the objectives of implementing standards for new fossil fuel power plants and site certificate amendments accordingly, and update the application requirements for both of those things to implement the standard for existing fossil fuel power plants and explain how the council will determine what a significant increase in emissions is, to update the existing carbon dioxide standards based on the most efficient technology that's currently operating in the United States, and to update the monetary offset rates based on empirical evidence of offsets. As a brief overview of kind of what I've just said, the original carbon standards took effect in 1997. They were updated several times. The legislature then passed its new carbon requirements in June of last year, and the bill took effect in September 25th of last year. We began this rulemaking in early 2022. Well, actually, we began scoping work on this rulemaking in early 22. Then the council initiated rulemaking and authorized the issuance of a notice of proposed rulemaking at its April 22nd meeting. Staff issued that notice of proposed rulemaking on April 29th. The hearing is today, and as I said, as it was noticed, the public comment deadline was 5 p.m. for written comments, and we are accepting oral comments. So to summarize what's in the proposed rules, we are proposing that the council is proposing to amend OAR 345 Division 24 for Rule 500 to incorporate the new requirements of HB 2021, clarify the standards applicable to the review of a application for a new fossil fuel power plant. We are recommending that the council is proposing, to amend Division 24 Rules 550, 590, and 620 to reset the emission standards based on the most efficient gas-fired power combined cycle combustion turbine plant that's commercially demonstrated and operated in the United States. And the council is proposing to amend Division 24 Rule 580 to increase the monetary offset rate by 50% from $2.85 per ton of carbon dioxide to $4.27 per ton of carbon dioxide. In addition, the council is proposing to amend rules in Division 20 and 21 to adopt rules to establish specific application requirements for fossil fuel power plants and other facilities that emit carbon dioxide. And the council is also proposing to amend Division 27, Rule 375 to implement the new requirements for amendments to existing site certificates for fossil fuel power plants and to define what is considered a significant increase in gross carbon dioxide emissions. There's also a number of non-substantive organizational and clerical changes to the rules, including but not limited to relocating all the carbon-specific definitions that are currently found in the definitions rule in Division 1 to Division 24 and repealing a few rules that basically just repeat what is already in the statute. So as of about 4:30 today, and I will check again to make sure that we didn't receive any more written comments, the council had received 7 written comments on this rulemaking. I won't go into the details now, but I will provide a summary of all those comments tomorrow, and we'll provide staff's recommended responses to that. But I did want to take a moment to address the comments of Kathy Moyd, who did request that the council extend the public comment period by up to by a minimum of 3 weeks, I think is what she requested. The council, the first day that these rules could statutorily become effective after the notice was last Friday or Saturday. I believe that was 50 days after the notice was given. So the council is not obligated to extend the comment deadline, but you may do so if you wish. I think it may be appropriate for the council to discuss that before we take comments in the hearing, just to let people know if they have more time before they give their oral comments tonight. So that is a question for you all. Chair Grail, would you like to deliberate on that?
So I was just sorry, I was reading what she had requested. So council members, do you have any comments on the request to extend this deadline?
Yeah, I don't think she can see me. So, Chair.
Go ahead.
Grail.
Yes, and go ahead, Cindy.
I have more question than a comment. Chris, are we waiting for more information from another party or for some reason? Go ahead.
Thank you, Councilmember Condon. So the commenters' request was specifically because they wanted additional time to prepare their comments and respond to some things I think that they saw in the documentation from the April meeting that they hadn't addressed in their comments, and maybe to also respond to other other comments. I don't know, but for staff's testimony at the April meeting, the council did ask us to go out and get field test data on the TVA's Allen combined cycle plant and the Dania Beach plant in Florida, and we actually do not have that data yet. It is outstanding, so if the comment period was left open, we could potentially put that into the record.
You're waiting for that. And if we are waiting for that, I don't see a problem with leaving it open.
Marcy, this is Hanley.
Go ahead, Hanley.
Christopher, do you think you're going to get the information from him?
You, Councilmember Jenkins. I've been in contact with somebody at General Electric Company. They have assured me that they've been in contact with the facility owner at NextEra and Florida Power and Light. They said I reached out to them yesterday and they said they had pinged their team and they were working on it and they would give me an update tomorrow. Since they have no obligation to provide us this data, I did not, press them on getting it to us today. So I can't guarantee that we will get it, but we have gotten some positive responses and it is still it's still active. I do not believe we will get data from the Tennessee Valley Authority without submitting a Freedom of Information Act request, which we could also consider going down that road. But
Thank you.
Thanks, Hanley. I just want to remind, I cannot see off of my phone, so please feel free to, say my name or Todd if you see anyone. By all means, call on them because I'm sorry I did not pick the right technology today. My question, this for the record, this is Chair Grail, is are we creating any perceived outcome if we allow this extension based off of this one request? And sort of along with Hanley saying, are we holding it open for something we may not receive?
If I understood the correct, are we creating any perceived unfairness in the record? Because some people have already commented and.
Yes. And from what
I can't speak to how people will perceive the council's action, but if we extend the comment period, it would be left open for everyone. In rulemaking, especially, any extension of the comment period would have to be left open for anybody. We can't treat agencies or any particular party differently than we do anybody else, and we would be required to renotice that there's been an extension, and the council would need to decide how long it wants to leave the record open.
I think that was the part I wanted to get to, was the whole renoticing and what all that does. Thank you. Any other comments, questions?
Marcy, this is Hanley. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I guess I'm interested in allowing the extension, but I think we ought to do it such that we can address this on our agenda in July.
Thank you. Others?
Chair Gurl, this is Kent, and
Yes, Kent.
I just wanted to make sure, Chris, that there's not any, I think you said this, but I am wanting to verify, there's no time constraints. There's not any timing issue that the extension is going to bump us up against.
I think the timing consideration with this rulemaking is that the update to the carbon monetary offset rate could take effect as early as July 1, 2022. And so if you wanted to be, have that come into effect at the earliest possible date, I think any extension of the comment period would probably go past that now. But that is not a statutory requirement. The council is not obligated to take that action. And so that would be the timing concern I'm aware of. There's no direction from the legislature or other bodies as far as getting rules in place to implement 2021 that I'm aware of, at least.
Thank you.
Grail, Cindy Condon.
Yes,
Just to make sure I understand that. So the July 1st date, if we held it open, August 1st might be a date, or September, do we, yeah, it will just be later. But one doesn't have to wait until July 1st of 2023. Right.
Kind of, that is correct. Yeah. That's the last time you changed that rule and increased the monetary offset was effective July 1, 2020. So we count it as a rolling calendar 2 years. So.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, this is Todd Cornett. I have a
Yes, Todd.
question, or rather just a sort of clarification for council members. So if you decide to hold open the comment period, we would need to renotice. And just from a practical standpoint, if you wanted this to be on the July council meeting, we're 4 weeks out from the council meeting. So if you allowed 3 weeks, then we would be receiving potentially comments 1 week before the council meeting. So, our production cycle is we give council members the first round of packets 2 weeks ahead of time. So you have a chance to review them, the secondary packet 1 week ahead of time. So just wanted to take that into consideration in terms of both staff. So Chris being able to review comments, summarize and package them. Also council being able to review comments. So whatever influence that has on your decision, if you decide to extend the comment period, whether it's 3 weeks or 2 weeks, that you have to take that into consideration about the schedule for the council meeting and everybody's ability to review and digest comments.
thank you.
RC, this is Hanley with Todd's comment in mind. We may not be able to, so the staff has to give new notice. But the record, can the record still be open while you're giving that notice? Yes. Okay, so in order for you to receive our next meeting, let's start there. Our next meeting is the 21st and the 22nd of July.
That's correct. And at this point, we don't believe we need 2 meeting dates. So likely it would be just the 22nd, which would
Okay.
be the Friday.
So best case scenario is you would like to have comments by, say, the 11th of July so that staff can review those and get them out to council?
A week ahead of time.
Yeah. I don't think we can give a full 3 weeks, but I think we can give the better part of 2. So that would be my proposal, is to leave it open until the 11th of July at 5 PM.
Thank you.
Certainly support Chair Grail, Cindy Condon. I'd support that.
Thank you, Cindy. Other comments, questions?
So Chair Grail, this is Ann Byer. I'm comfortable with the 2 weeks. I think that's responsive to the comment, but also meets the staff deadlines.
Thank you, Ann. So,
This is Jordan. I agree as well.
thank you, Jordan. Perry,
Grail, this is Perry Chalkwood. I agree also.
excellent. Thank you. All right. Well, Christopher, I think we've heard from and I concur. Do we have to make an actual motion for this?
I look to Patrick to see if he has any response to that, whether sort of a consensus. We clearly heard a consensus by council members to extend the comment period and renotice. Patrick, what's your thoughts on, does an actual vote is needed or not?
Always my preference to vote when you're taking an action. I would consider this an action, so I would go ahead and do it by vote.
Thank you. So with that directive from council, would someone please make a motion?
Madam Chair, this is Hanley. I move that we leave the record open for the CO2 rulemaking till 5 PM on July 11th.
Thank you,
And
Hanley.
renotice. And renotice.
And renotice.
Got that
Madam Chair, this
addition?
is Kent,
Yes,
and I'll
Kent?
second. Yes.
Thank you. We have a motion and we have a second. Any further comment? Hearing none, Mr. Secretary. Oh, sorry.
Just Cindy Conant, hopefully we'll get more information if we can from FPL, I guess, or whoever it's coming from. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Marcy Grail,
Yes.
Cindy Condon, Kent Howe,
Yes.
Jordan Truitt,
Yes.
Perry Chalktoot,
Yes.
Ann Byer,
Yes.
Hanley Jenkins.
Yes.
Motion carries, Madam Chair. And just for clarification, that means we will not be having the agenda item relating to the carbon standard tomorrow. So we can still continue with the public hearing tonight, receive oral comments, but the agenda item, sorry, let me see. Agenda item H tomorrow, that will be an agenda modification because that will be removed from the agenda.
Thank you. All right. So Christopher, with that, I guess it's back to you to conduct the public comments if there are going to be any.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Grill. Yeah, and thank you. We will get the notice of the extension out as soon as possible. So we can scratch this first bullet point. So oral comments will be accepted until the close of the hearing today, and written comments will be accepted until 5 p.m. on July 11th. So I'm going to go ahead and open the public comment at this time. It is 6:45. If you wish to provide oral comments, let's see. Oh, I'm sorry. It is 5:45. I can read a digital or a manual clock still. So if you wish to provide comments, please do raise your hand on WebEx at this time. When your name is called, state your name and the name of any organization you are representing for the record. The council may ask clarifying questions to the commenter, but the council will not respond to questions or comments during this hearing. And again, I'm going to put these instructions on how to raise your hand up on the screen here. And to begin our testimony, I'm going to call on Kathy Moyd. Ms. Moyd, if you'd like to provide your testimony, please do so now. If I can unmute you, you may have to unmute yourself.
I can't.
Excellent. We can hear you. So please go ahead.
Okay.
Ms. Moyd.
Thank you. My cat, of course, decided to pick exactly this instant to decide she had to come over and see me. My name's Kathy Moyd. I'm testifying on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Oregon. I wish to thank you very much for the extension. I realize that this is a very complicated issue, and it turns out that I used the April 15th version of the draft rules to write our comments. Plus, I'm always interested in listening to a public hearing and seeing if there are some issues raised that we want to consider. So I was really surprised when I found out that you were planning on having effectively zero time in between the public hearing and the adoption of the rules. So thank you very much. We previously provided testimony in support of the final versions of HB 2021 and the Climate Protection Program. In particular, we recognize that the way non-emitting electricity is defined may allow for carbon capture and storage. However, as mentioned by other commenters, the technology associated with carbon capture is still being developed, and EFSC must verify that for new site certificates, the generation of the electricity will be non-emitting. The generation of natural gas-powered electricity generated in Oregon and exported to another state is not covered by either HB 2021 or the Climate Protection Program. At the current time, the amount of that electricity is very small. However, if other states start buying that electricity, the amount of greenhouse emissions could increase. We believe that these rules could provide a way to limit the emissions of exported electricity just by adopting these rules. HB 2021 specifies that an amendment to a site certificate approved before its effective date could not be approved if it would significantly increase the gross carbon dioxide emissions. And we realize this is an ambiguous term, but we're unable to come up with anything that would help, given the fact that the targets in HB 2021 gradually decrease over time. And so there really is no particular value that could be associated. No, I lost my place. Based on our limited review, we have some changes we ask you to consider. Please see the testimony submitted by the League of Women Voters of Oregon for more details. The ORAR section on changes exempt from requiring amendment was not changed in the proposed rules. It provides that an increase in fuel consumption of less than 10% would not require an amendment. This exception was not included in HB 2021, and we are concerned that an increase of 10% could lead to an increase of carbon dioxide emissions by 10%, which we do not consider to be insignificant. We recommend that this be deleted here and in the ORAR section on the scope of council review. The OAR section on amendment of notice of intent should be updated to include the specific requirement in HB 2021 that an amendment will not be approved if it would significantly increase the gross carbon dioxide emissions. Because the overall intent of HB 2021 is to decrease greenhouse gas emissions, we suggest that for this amendment, the extension of the expiration date should be precluded unless the facility will capture and sequester or store all the carbon dioxide emissions. We appreciate the effort you have taken in incorporating the siting requirements in HB 2021, and thank you for this opportunity to provide comments.
Ms. Moyd, do any members of the council have questions for Kathy Moyd? Okay, hearing none. Thank you again. Next, I see that Jake Stevens has a question, and I'll just remember that we can probably respond to procedural questions or questions about the hearing, but we can't necessarily respond to questions about the rules right now. So, Mr. Stevens, if you have a question, please go ahead.
Well, the comment I posted was actually just agreeing with more time for comment on the proposed rules. Thank you. I did have some other comments, but I was hoping to listen to others first. I guess I'd say briefly that I agree with the comments that were just provided. I guess, should I make comments now, or is it all right if I comment at the end?
Mr. Stevens, yeah, if you would like to wait till the end, I can go ahead and move to other folks and then call on you again before we recess this hearing.
Great, thank you.
Okay, next we have Brendan McCarthy. Mr. McCarthy. Brendan McCarthy, if you're there, we cannot hear you right now, but I do see that you are unmuted.
How about now? Hello? How about now?
Hi, yes, we can hear you now. Please go ahead.
You can hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Sorry, I just switched to the right speakers. Brendan McCarthy with Portland General Electric. I'm an attorney in the legal department here. Procedural question, given the extension, does council envision having another opportunity for oral testimony, or would this evening be the one and only? That is, the next time you have this on your agenda for the July meeting, would you again have a public comment period?
McCarthy, that would be no. We will be accepting just written comments until July 11th, but there will not be another opportunity for written comments.
Perfect. Then I'll just make some brief comments tonight then. Thank you. Council, thanks for the opportunity to give you some testimony tonight. PG spent more than 2 decades working to reduce our emissions associated with generating electricity and advocating for policies that support those reductions, including the passage of House Bill 2020. And going back to 1997, PG testified in support of the adoption of the carbon dioxide emission standard. I believe we were actually the only entity outside of government to do so. We look forward to continuing to work with our customers and regulators to achieve HB 2021's greenhouse gas reduction targets. In our reading of the proposed language for the rule, the direction from the legislature regarding amendments of site certificates that would allow FSEC to approve a site certificate amendment for changed operations up to a level below a significant increase is essentially nullified by the proposed rule language. It essentially, by referencing the rule that allows entities to make changes without a site certificate, the way it does so would ensure that if we were to make certain changes, the increase of CO2 from those changes would be 0. So we're concerned that if staff's recommended language is adopted, it would limit the ability of us to think innovatively or creatively about how to transition our existing generation fleet in pursuit of achieving the system-wide 2030 and 2040 reduction targets. Now, again, those targets are mandated and we will accomplish them irrespective of what FSEC does at its rules. Because the guiding hand here is through the PUC and through DEQ. So we believe the legislature's intent for us and for FSEC was to be creative in how to utilize our existing plants, which may include a modest increase at one site, but a decrease in overall system emissions as we continue to evolve our generation mix. We have submitted suggested language in our written comments that we believe is consistent with the legislature's intent to spur innovation while continuing to reduce carbon emissions in our sector. We're happy to answer any questions the council may have about our proposed language, and thank you for the time to speak.
Mr. McCarthy, do any members of the council have questions? Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I do not see any other raised hands on my screen. Can I just get verbal confirmation from Nancy? Okay, great. Mr. Stevens, if you'd like to provide your comments, that would be a great time.
All right, well, thank you. That was a shorter wait than I was hoping for, but thank you, council and staff. Appreciate your comments and your efforts on this. I'll echo one more of Kathy's comments that I think, procedurally and in the spirit of the good work that you're trying to do there was on point. There being an opportunity for follow-on comment from other parties, I think is a really good idea, sort of generally procedurally, as in an ideal world, we might listen to each other and learn things, and or parties might come to a consensus or explore solutions that might be acceptable and have the opportunity to follow on with further written comments based on what they heard from the other parties. If they learned something new and useful or alarming or, however. So I definitely support Kathy's comment about there being an opportunity to submit further written comments after these oral and all the written comments come in before hearing in general. In terms of the proposed rules, specifically, I think as relates, one, the issue that PGE raised, and two, just the overall edits regarding the natural gas plants. On the one hand, I guess we disagree with PGE's presentation of the approach and the changes there. Overall, having read the letter that was filed and heard the comments just then, it sounds a lot like we're going to try to do creative things, but our emissions may still go up. In the context of multi-hundred megawatt and so forth gas plants that are available, there really shouldn't be any universe en route to 0% by 2040, at which those plants' annual emissions are not radically being reduced. And I don't think there's any world in which innovations and creativity of whatever sort should push that upward. If they're running substantially less and emitting, they should be emitting substantially less, even if maybe per unit increments could go up slightly or overall. But we would recommend rejecting that approach, and also making sure that any permit extensions that are applied for are in the context of absolutely leading to the compliance with the 2040 requirements, perhaps with some exceptions for system emergency conditions, et cetera, so that unique traumatic events to the grid, they could be available. But overall, that should be sort of on a radically declining curve, not hypothetically increasing due to creativity. And that should perform the backdrop of that analysis and any modifications to the rules. Second, and sort of segueing off of that, however, and Newsun Energy, sorry for the record, is our organization commenting on our behalf. And we do believe that the current thermal units which exist, as billions of dollars of installed generating capacity, probably do have a useful role in facilitating the successful decarbonization, and thus, encouraging and facilitating the decline compliant with those curves and the continual progress requirements under HB 2021. Should be something that can be facilitated and considered in a permit extension. But also recognizing that there will be thermal units that may be intended to be non-fossil units, such as a whole, green hydrogen plant or a biodiesel reciprocating engine, or a variety of units like that, which would be greenhouse gas free, but which could provide pretty substantial benefits to the world, the market, ratepayers, and avoiding blackouts and reliability issues. Having an exception of some sort of de minimis threshold, which provides that thermal plants may exist, and if they did consume some sort of minor amount of natural gas in system emergency conditions, or under some threshold, if plant ran 1 day a year or 5 days every 5 years or something like that, some discrete number, that would be permitted, so that those units, if there were other fuel shortage issues like the amount of biodiesel available, or constraints in the hydrogen storage or renewable gas, et cetera, that those units could still protect us from multi-billion-dollar blackout type events like have happened in Texas and California, and that those de minimis thresholds could be allowed and be compliant with HB 2021, which, while it does prohibit the permitting of new fossil power plants, those would not be fossil power plants, but merely, like hospitals and data centers and other things, have backups essentially available for discrete, highly limited events, and that would be worth considering as the rules are finalized. Happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Stevens, do any members of the council have questions? Seeing none, and not seeing any other hands, I will go ahead and recess the hearing on the 2022 carbon standards rulemaking. Thank you, everybody, for providing your comments. Next up, we have the protected areas, scenic resources, and recreation standards rulemaking hearing. I'm sorry, before I move on to this, I will see that I have a hand raised from a call-in user with a 890 number. Did you have a comment on the carbon standard rulemaking?
Thank you. I do. Thank you. And I apologize. I thought I'd raised my hand, but I'm on the phone too, so it's a little backwards technology-wise. So thank you. My name is Dan Sears. I'm the Conservation Director for Columbia River Keeper. And we submitted more detailed written comments on behalf of Columbia River Keeper, Verde, Rogue Climate, Earth Justice, and Friends of the Columbia River Gorge. I'll just highlight a couple of the main points, and I'll be brief. And again, thank you for catching me here at the end. First of all, we support the proposal to increase the monetary offset rate by the full amount currently allowed under Oregon law, which is 50%. We also support staff's recommendation to reset emission standards based on the most efficient standalone combined cycle combustion turbine gas-fired energy facility that is commercially demonstrated and operating in the United States. By updating the offset rate and efficiency expectation for gas plants, FSEC is moving the ball forward in meeting the standards set by the governor's Executive Order 2004. There are a few issues where we'd like to see changes, and I'll take the issue of significance first. We urge FSEC to reconsider the proposed approach to the question of what constitutes a significant increase in pollution. HB 2021 intended to prevent significant increases in carbon emissions from polluting fracked gas plants, which are already the largest emitters in Oregon. FSEC's approach exempts from the requirement to obtain a site certificate an electric generation facility increasing its fuel consumption by more than 10%, by no more than 10%. So a 10% increase in a gas plant using 100 million cubic feet per day, for instance, we think should be deemed significant. For example, 10 million cubic feet per day is more than all of the residential gas usage in many Oregon cities. So again, to ensure compliance with HB 2021 and Governor Brown's Executive Order 2004, FSEC should go further and clarify and define the meaning of significant in the specific context of gas plants to include additional thresholds beyond just the uniform 10% increase. Any increase in frac gas use is significant given the clear direction by Governor Brown and Executive Order 2004 to limit new emissions plus the requirements of HB 2021 to avoid additional emissions from new or existing gas plants. And kind of going along with this argument, we just reiterate that gas plants do more damage to the atmosphere than what is just caused by the emissions of the plant itself. Wells, pipelines, compressors all release greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. 3 to 9% of a power plant's gas demand could be released to the atmosphere, including emissions from these upstream pipelines, compressors, and wells, as well as methane emissions from the gas plant. Further, as we described in our previously mentioned written comments, the reliability of carbon capture and sequestration remains unproven in Oregon and elsewhere. And so the idea that these fossil plants could be non-emitting is one we would ask FSEC to really deeply question, given the unproven track record of carbon capture and sequestration over the very long timelines that would be required for them to durably remove or prevent carbon dioxide from entering the atmosphere. Thank you for your patience, and thank you for holding this hearing.
So Sears, any questions from the council? Great. Thank you again. Okay, so with that, I will once again recess the hearing on the 2022 carbon standards update and implementation of HB 2021, and I will move to the protected areas, scenic resources, and recreation standards rulemaking hearing. Before I open the floor to comments, once again, I have just a quick background and procedural history and an overview of the proposed rules. So as the council knows, the council must adopt standards for the siting of energy facilities, including standards to address areas designated for protection by the state or federal government, impacts of the facility on recreation, scenic, and aesthetic values, and the council has done so under the protected areas standard, the recreation standard, and the scenic resources standard. The protected areas and scenic resources standards were last updated in 2007. The recreation standard was last updated in 2002. We began this rulemaking project in, I believe, 2018 to address issues related to the three standards and the associated information requirements and other rules that are associated with the standards. The objectives were to ensure that the standards clearly identify the resources and values they're intended to protect, to ensure that the standards are consistent with ORS 469-310, which sets the siting policy for the state of Oregon, and to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the council's review processes and procedures by resolving ambiguity, lack of clarity, and inconsistency in the rules. So as I mentioned, council initiated the informal section of this rulemaking in October of 2020. We solicited early written comments in November of 2020 and received a number of comments from various stakeholders. Council reviewed those early comments on April 23rd, 2021, and directed staff to go out and get more feedback through a series of rulemaking workshops, which we conducted in the summer and fall of last year. We brought our preliminary analysis and recommendations to the council in February, got some feedback from council and revised the draft rules and recirculated them for an additional round of comments in March. The council considered proposed rules at 2 meetings earlier this year, one in April and one in May, and then approved proposed rules in May of 2022. Staff issued the notice of proposed rulemaking on June 1st. And today is, of course, the rulemaking hearing associated with this rulemaking. The last day for public comment on this rulemaking is July 21st, 2022 at 5 p.m. I'm going to go through the summary of the proposed rules relatively quickly. And I've kind of organized the changes by the standard. So for the protected area standard, the proposed rules would require an applicant to identify the managing agency of any protected area within the applicable study or analysis area for the project, as well as a mailing address and other reasonably available contact information for that protected area manager. This is kind of coinciding with a policy change that the council has proposed to start providing public notice to the protected areas managers, along with any public notice that goes out on the notice of intent or an application. We do expect that to be formalized in rules in a later rulemaking. The proposed rules also amend the protected area standard to remove the effective date for designations, allowing the council to consider impacts to protected areas that are designated after a notice of intent is filed, but prior to the filing of a complete application. The proposed rules would update and simplify the list of designations that are considered to be protected areas under the standard and would remove specific examples to reduce the need for future rulemaking. And the rules would clarify the exception for when a linear facility may be located within the boundaries of a protected area. For the scenic resources standard, the proposed rules would amend the standard to require an assessment of visual impacts to state scenic resources in addition to the current requirements to assess impacts to local, tribal, and federal scenic resources. And it would also make clarifying changes to Exhibit R requirements for visual impact assessments, with the potential that that issue would be revisited in future rulemaking as well. Specific to both the scenic resources and recreation standards, the proposed rules would amend those 2 standards to allow the council to consider evidence introduced into the record related to impacts to scenic resources or recreational opportunities that are located outside of the analysis areas for those, without going through the process of amending the project order to amend the boundaries of the analysis areas. And then would also contain a number of administrative or organizational changes, such as moving the definition of what is a protected area out of the standard itself to Division 1, and specifying that the standards are only applicable to the review of a request for amendment or a application that's filed on or after the effective date of the rules. So I'm going to go ahead and open the hearing on the protected area scenic resources and recreation standards rulemaking. If there is anybody on the WebEx webinar or on phone that would like to participate, raise your hand now. If you're on the phone, you can raise your hand by pressing *3. As a reminder, just like last time, the council may ask any clarifying questions that you wish to during the hearing, but the council will not respond to questions or comments during this hearing. Written comments will be accepted until 5 p.m. on July 21st. So I'm going to put the instruction up here, but we actually do have one person in the room that would like to provide comments. So Angela Crowley Cook, if you would like to come up and you do have if you want to go first. Excellent.
Thank you, staff and council members. My name is Angela Crowley-Cook. I'm the Executive Director of OSEA, the Oregon Solar Plus Storage Industries Association. And there's a reason why I'm the only person here in the room. This is a really important topic. And so I wanted to not take the easy way out and zoom in, but come and be here in front of you because it's really critical. And not just for not just for my members and for the solar industry, but really for all Oregonians. As you know very well, we're in the middle of a climate crisis in Oregon, in our world. We see it this year, this wet spring. Increased precipitation is directly because of climate change. And even though we had that wet spring, 70% of our state is still in drought. We've seen increased wildfires, ocean acidification. I don't have to go through them all for you, but you know the place that we're at here and the effects that Oregon is feeling because of climate change. And that's the reason I believe that Governor Brown put forward her Executive Order 2004 on climate change. And at that time, the council took action to implement that executive order. And in particular, the council approved moving forward with a project to, and I'm reading directly from the department's plan here, a project to better align standards and application requirements. And the objective of the rulemaking would be to conduct a comprehensive review of the standards and application requirements to create a clear separation of procedural and substantive provisions and rules, and to simplify procedures for review where practicable, to review application requirements, to clarify specific information needed to demonstrate compliance. And finally, and the one that I'm most concerned about is to evaluate standards and application requirements to determine if the requirements should be adjusted for different types of energy facilities, including facilities which generate energy from renewable sources. And so you all have acted, and the department has recognized that renewable energy is important to meet our climate change goals and should be looked at and reviewed. And so the department, I'm happy that the department has finally found someone to do that review of the standards. And so for us, it makes sense to wait until that review is concluded before moving forward with rulemaking on this topic. I understand that there is one, issue that some of the areas are out of date. There are dates in the current rules, and I understand that that is something that needs to be addressed. If it can't wait until the review is concluded, we would suggest that the council move forward on rulemaking only for that particular issue of changing, removing the effective dates and making the dates certain of when there would be new protected areas included. That makes sense to us. We worked with staff over the past year to kind of improve that part and make sure that it would provide clarity and consistency for applicants. However, the rest of the rules we have great concern with. Unfortunately, they create uncertainty and leave things not clear when the applicant is trying to move through the process. As you all know very well, it's a long process, it's a complicated process, an expensive one. And part of the governor's executive order and the department's plan was to reduce costs and reduce delays. And so as we see most of these rules, although there have been improvements, which we appreciate, but they do create uncertainty and increase delays and costs. And so we're very concerned that these rules might move forward before that comprehensive review has happened. And so I'm here to ask you today to delay this rulemaking until that review is completed. In addition, one thing has come to our concern, unfortunately, late in the process, that the draft rules say that there are no small business concerns. Unfortunately, that is blatantly false. There are many small business concerns, and it looks like they weren't really fully investigated in the proposal of this draft rules. The OSEA members that have site certificates are small businesses. They have way less than 50 employees. And in my communication with staff, there was some discussion about how maybe they didn't technically qualify because they have other subsidiaries that for each particular project. However, it's the same company. It's not as if a large company like PacifiCorp then formed a smaller company. It's the same folks that run these companies. It's one small business that has individual corporations for particular projects. And so many small businesses are actually impacted by these rules, and unfortunately, it looks like no small business concerns were, that formal review about small business concerns wasn't completed before coming to you today. So again, while we appreciate that there were slight improvements to the rule over the past year, because of the big issues that we're facing as a state, as a globe, we ask that you delay this so that we can reduce that uncertainty, those delays and costs, and make sure the review happens first before we expand other rules through the FSEC process. Thank you.
Council members have any clarifying questions? Okay, hearing none. Thank you, Ms. Carly Cook.
Thank you.
Next, we have Mr. Brian Kelly. Mr. Kelly, if you'd like to provide your testimony, please go ahead.
Great. Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, Mr. Kelly, we can hear you.
Great. Thank you. Wishing everyone a good evening. My name is Brian Kelly. I am the Restoration Director for the Greater Hells Canyon Council based in LeGrand, Oregon. We're a nonprofit conservation organization formed in 1967, and we are located here in the Blue Mountains in the Greater Hells Canyon region. We plan to submit detailed comments on the proposed rulemaking. Today, I just wanted to give you a little verbal context. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you this evening. Personally, I've lived in LeGrand here in the northeast corner of the state for over 40 years. My career has been as a forester, as a conservationist, and as an arborist. I'm proud to be a certified arborist for over 26 years. During that time, I've done a lot of field work in the wildlands in this corner of Oregon. And the thing I want to emphasize to you to sum it all up is please take these rules for protected, scenic, and recreation values, please take them seriously. I agree that climate change is a huge concern, is perhaps the biggest concern we have. We need to take steps to deal with that for sure. I'm personally disappointed that we haven't come further than we have, but there it is. As a result, though, I'm seeing results on the wildlands in this area. That comes from climate change, but it also comes from development, from increases in population in this great state of Oregon. And it's all kind of a cascade that has negative effects on wildlife habitat. What may look like open space is to various wildlife species their habitat. We're seeing a lot of impacts and a lot of challenges to wildlife because of degradation of their habitat. So, energy developments do impact the open spaces and the natural world. Some of that's inevitable, but we want to make sure that any impacts are minimized. And I think that's where these rules for protected areas, scenic values, and recreational values come in. I will tell you an anecdote that's real life experience. For over 10 years, I did a volunteer project where we pulled invasive weeds down in the Hells Canyon National Recreation Area in collaboration with the Forest Service around a federally listed threatened plant species called McFarland's 4-o'clock. It's a beautiful, beautiful flowering plant, only grows in a dozen spots, and they're all down in the canyons. Maybe a smarter guy than me would have figured out earlier than I did that the weeds were all coming in from the roads that were built to service the power line towers coming out of the dams in Hells Canyon. Those roads, because they're scraped, the topsoil is basically scraped off. So the main plants that grow there are the invasive weeds, and the livestock down there are happy to use the roads for access, and they transport the seeds for the weeds. So when we're down there digging weeds, finally I'm going, where are all these darn weeds coming from? Well, they were coming from these roads. Any energy development basically has roads associated with it to some extent. These are not things that, we normally look at the top of the list, but they are an impact that comes with an energy development. So that's just one experience that I've had with how these kind of things can degrade habitat, not only for threatened plants, but for wildlife that depend on plants as habitat. So thank you for listening. Like I said earlier, we will submit detailed comments, but I just wanted to provide the context that we are very much concerned about potential impacts to protected areas, the scenic resources, and the recreation in the state of Oregon. Thanks for your attention, and I wish you all a great evening.
Mr. Kelly, do any members of the council have questions? All right, thank you. I'm seeing that Mr. Jake Stevens still has a question mark up, and that may just still be up, but if you do have a comment on this rulemaking, please go ahead.
Well, I must have hit some button that I don't know exists. So sorry about that, Todd. I do have comments. Again, happy to wait for others, but I guess I'll just roll with it since that didn't go very well last time. So thank you, council, and appreciate the opportunity to make comments on the these rules. This is Jake Stevens, for the record, the CEO of New Sun Energy. And New Sun Energy invests in the development of renewable, particularly solar energy, non-emitting development in Oregon and the Northwest, but especially Oregon. And I appreciate Angela Crowley-Cook's comments, and we support those comments by OSEA in their entirety. And I would highlight that we are also a small business under the definitions that were defined, and we are affected by this, and the rules of that FSEC adopts have high impact to us in terms of the potential business standards, business endeavors that we implement in our investments, and heavily affect us in the the burdensomeness of the FSEC process, which is essentially $1 million process to do what counties generally accomplish for thousands or tens of thousands of dollars relative to pretty clean standards in most cases. Is a significant threshold, and the rules moving in the wrong direction only creates additional challenges with that in terms of FSEC's efficiency on that front. So obviously that is a concern, and I would add to OSEA's comments that in addition to the I think it's Governor Brown's Executive Order 20-04 and what it asked the state agencies to do. HB 2021 has its own standards, and as per the prior proceeding, under HB 2021, we have 100% clean energy standard by 2040. I'll note that under HB 2021, Section 2, the policy statement is that it is the policy of the state of Oregon that retail electricity providers rely on non-emitting electricity in accordance with the clean energy targets set forth in Section 3 of this 2021 Act, and eliminate greenhouse gas emissions associated with Oregon retail electricity consumers by 2040. It then says in paragraph 2 that electricity generated in a manner that produces zero greenhouse gas emissions also be generated to the maximum extent practicable in a manner that provides additional direct benefits to the communities in this state in the forms of creating and sustaining meaningful living wage jobs, promoting workforce equity, and increasing energy security and resiliency. And in short, as Representative Helm, the vice chair, stated as part of the legislative intent, is well understood that meant that these facilities would be built in Oregon and to provide benefits of labor in the state, because the construction and operational jobs associated with them, the maximum extent practicable, is arguably, and I think demonstrably, entirely possible within the state boundaries of Oregon. Certainly the close proximity where Oregonians can work and benefit from these benefits enumerated in that paragraph. So as such, as Angela alluded to or described the burdens and challenges and concerns and potential risks and extra complications with the proposed rules. For these rules and all the rules that FSEC is considering related to permitting facilities in the state, ultimately it is charged with implementing the policies of the state of Oregon and facilitating the success of that. And I think all of the rules that are considered by FSEC going forward need to put them in the context of the executive order and HB 2021's requirements and evaluate whether those rules on item by item basis as well as a cumulative basis facilitate the success and effectuate the ability of the state to succeed in those policy states and policy requirements and obligations that is imposing on the state. So I think as such, agreeing with Angela's recommendation that this be delayed, I think the review process for this needs to systematically evaluate, whether that is occurring or whether additional burdens are being imposed and to what benefit. And conversely, we would recommend in this case and others that FSEC be reviewing the rules that apply and the standards that apply to determine, where they are achieving and facilitating those policy, legislated statutory policy positions of the state of Oregon and the compliance obligations that it's imposing and so forth, for these purposes. So I guess I'll just close with saying that, Oregon is obviously unquestionably beautiful, gorgeous state, and there's a lot to protect here. But we are engaged in a battle. We are in the ecosystem collapse prevention business now, and the renewable developers, those that are seeking to facilitate decarbonization, are in the effort and engaged in a pretty challenging, incredibly challenging effort to facilitate the decarbonization to prevent entire ecosystems from collapsing. And it is a sad truth that in Oregon, due to other land use laws that FSEC did not write, but that limit the agricultural development of land, and other states, reduction of water use and development of farmland is favored and supported. But in the state of Oregon currently, there are habitat impacts that are undeniably and unavoidable in achieving these other objectives, which pains us to no end, but is an unavoidable truth of the bigger job at hand and these, as memorialized in the statute. And it's complex. The gentleman before, described these issues, no doubt accurately, and simultaneously the power line corridors in Crook County, where we're familiar with, and perhaps some others are, have become the primary corridors for the antelope herds that move through. And so, it's complex, but ultimately, I think Oregon has a lot of well-developed standards, but they should be moving in the direction of how to facilitate success and put in the context and including the relative overall benefit. And further to that, we would also encourage, ODO's staff in other legislative proceedings and rulemakings at the LCD and wherever else to help bring testimony and resources in Odo and in support of facilitating the ability of counties and other jurisdictions and in its own proceedings, the imperative to balance these considerations as we ensure that these projects do get permitted and are able to move forward and be successfully invested in, which has its own challenges as well. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Mr. Stevens, do any members of the council have questions? See none in the room. Okay, with that, I do not see any other hands raised in WebEx. I'll just make one final call. If you'd like to provide comment on the protected area scenic resources or recreation standards rulemaking, please go ahead and raise your hand now. You can do that by clicking on the participants button at the bottom of your screen and then clicking on the little hand. Okay, and if you're on the phone, you can press *3. I am seeing no hands. And Nancy, are you seeing any? Excellent. Okay. Seeing no further comments, I'll go ahead and recess the hearing on the protected areas, scenic resources, and recreation standards rulemaking and move to our final rulemaking hearing tonight, which is on wildfire prevention and risk mitigation. As before, I will just provide a quick background and procedural history on this rulemaking before opening the floor to comments. In August of 2020, the Oregon Public Utility Commission opened a rulemaking related to risk mitigation and planning for wildfire in August 2020. That was part of a response to the governor's earlier executive order. Actually, that may have been Executive Order 2004 as well, to address the wildfire risks and risk mitigation plans for Oregon's electric utilities. During the 2021 legislative session, the legislature passed Senate Bill 762, which established new standards for electric utility wildfire plans, required statewide risk analyses, and also created several new programs for wildfire mitigation, both in terms of risk and health impacts. The PUC adopted permanent rules for wildfire protection plans from investor-owned utilities in December of 2021, and is continuing to do supplemental rulemaking. The 3 investor-owned electric utilities in Oregon submitted their plans earlier this year, and those were all approved. In December of 2022, and those were all approved just a month or so ago. The council is also conducting kind of its own rulemaking to establish wildfire protection and risk mitigation standards for energy facilities. As we all know and have heard several times, climate change is increasing in both frequency and severity climate change is increasing the frequency and severity of wildfires in Oregon and across the western United States. And there have been several catastrophic fires throughout the West that have been found to have been caused by electric infrastructure. And there's also been documented cases of wildfire at or caused by renewable energy facilities and associated transmission lines, which have raised concerns about fire safety. The council started this rulemaking to find rules that would minimize the risk of a facility subject to the council's jurisdiction causing wildfire to ensure that there's sufficient programs and procedures in place to ensure the protection of public health and safety in the event that there's a wildfire at an energy facility site, regardless of whether that was caused by the facility or not. And third, to maintain consistency with the rules adopted by the Public Utility Commission to the extent possible. The council adopted or initiated this rulemaking back in October of 2021. We sent out a comment letter requesting comments from Oregon's tribes in January, and then also conducted a rulemaking workshop with interested members of the public, including several representatives of electric utilities. We developed our proposals for proposed rules and brought that to you in May, and the council did approve proposed rules and authorize the issuance of a notice of proposed rulemaking. We issued that notice on June 1st. So today is obviously the public hearing for this rulemaking. The last day for public comment is July 1st for written comment is July 1st at 5 p.m. To give a quick summary of what is in these proposed rules, the council is proposing to adopt a new standard, which would require the council to find that an applicant has adequately characterized wildfire risk associated with a proposed facility when it receives an application. And second, that the council must find that the facility will be operated in compliance with a council-approved wildfire mitigation plan. The proposed rules include a provision that allows the council to approve a facility without making those findings if the facility is subject to a wildfire protection plan approved by the Public Utility Commission or a plan approved by the governing body of a consumer-owned utility. And then the proposed rules also specify that the new standard would apply to the review of any new application for site certificate or request for amendment that was filed on or after the effective date of the permanent rules. And by filed, we do mean filed as a complete application. So I will go ahead and open the hearing on the wildfire prevention and risk mitigation rulemaking at this time. If there's anybody that would wish to provide comment, please go ahead and raise your hand. Oh, and I'm sorry, there is an incorrect date in this. The the slide, for those of you who can't see the slide, says that written comments must be received by February 10. That is not correct. These written comments on this rulemaking will be accepted till July 21st, 2021 at 5 p.m. Thank you, Councilmember Jenkins. Okay, so Mr. Stevens, I see we may be having the same issues. If you would like to provide comment, go ahead. If not, that's okay too. But
yeah, same issue. I didn't click anything, but since I'm here and I'm often not, thank you for your work on this effort. Jake Stevens, New Sun Energy, CEO for the record, which develops renewable energy facilities. I think we'll further review these, but I think as you're considering comments, one comment I would have is that particularly for solar facilities, the contribution to fire reduction in wildfire risk from basically creating large fire breaks is something that should be considered essentially credited and included in sort of in context as how these rules work and how applications are considered. And I would also recommend that be considered in the context of wildlife mitigation for under the direct FSEC permit applications for those facilities as well. As we've talked to the wildlife biologists in the districts that we're working in, there's recognition that fire breaks have the ability to prevent the entire ecosystem from burning down, in these large valleys. And I've actually literally driven home from a permit hearing in Harney County as the world was on fire, and watched that occur. And those brush fires just go and go and go until they run out of fuel. And so large fire breaks, including the setbacks from in front of fences and other facilities, are actually potentially mitigation opportunities to protect the existing habitat and also contribute to the objectives I think this rulemaking is focused on. So that may not be spot on in terms of what the rules are that you're proposing, but happy to consider that further, and just wanted to put that in context as something that's come up in our discussions with ODFW and others that are thinking about ways to protect the landscape from the same issues as well as the wildlife habitat.
Mr. Stevens, any clarifying questions? See none. Thank you so much. I see that Jim Kreider has his hand up. Mr. Kreider.
Can you hear me?
Sorry,
Okay.
I don't know if you could hear me. Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead, Jim.
Okay, thanks. I saw you unmuted me, so I just wanted to make sure. I have more or less of a general comment, and that is more or less as I've been listening to this, people have commented, but we really haven't had a dialogue or an exchange of ideas with the council because they're not engaging in a dialogue or asking questions. We don't understand what the council is thinking, what their minds are, how they're looking at this. And I find it interesting and kind of impossible to do rulemaking because we don't have a dialogue. We do not know what the council thinks. We do not what they think is important. When I've been to meetings, usually the people on the panel ask questions of the people that are presenting. I feel like, why come to a rule hearing like this when there's no questions? Just submit a written comment. It's extremely frustrating to go to decision makers on important issues like this, and there is not a dialogue with the public, which makes me think sometimes maybe everybody's mind's made up before they come to the room. Because when I am on a council like this, I read the material and I ask questions. And I'm just not seeing that in this particular rulemaking today. And I would like to express my frustration with the process. And I thank you very much. And I'd love to take questions from the council.
Mr. Kreider, are there any questions from the council? Okay, hearing none. Thank you, Mr. Kreider. I
Thank
am
you.
not seeing any other hands raised on this rulemaking. But I will go ahead and make one last call here before I close the hearing on the wildfire rulemaking, and then I'm going to go ahead and cycle through the other two rulemakings that we had recessed, just to make sure that there's nobody missed the window. So once again, I'll call for any final comments on the wildfire prevention and risk mitigation rulemaking. If you have comments, please raise your hand. Otherwise, we will be accepting written comments until July 21st. Okay, seeing no comments, the public hearing on the wildfire prevention and risk mitigation rulemaking is now closed. The time is 6:45. Okay, Hanley, make sure you're ready. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and reopen the public hearing on the 2022 carbon standard updates and the implementation of HB 2021. Did anybody that wanted to provide comments on that rulemaking, would anybody like to make comments on that rulemaking that did not get an opportunity to provide comments earlier? If so, please raise your hand. You can, again, do that by pressing the hand button on the lower right-hand side of your screen or pressing *3 on the phone. Okay, seeing no comments, I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing on House Bill 2021 implementation and the 2022 carbon standards update. And then finally going to the hearing on the protected area scenic resources and recreation standards rulemaking. Would anybody like to provide comments on those proposed rules that did not get an opportunity to do so earlier? Okay, I'm seeing no new hands come up, so I will go ahead and close the public hearing on the protected area scenic resources and recreation standards rulemaking as well. And with that, that concludes our 3 rulemaking hearings, and that also concludes my presentation. So, Chair Grail, I will return the floor to you.
Thank you, Christopher. So the time is now 6:47 p.m. And before I say that, Todd, is there anything else that needs done before we close out today?
I think we are concluded for today. There's nothing else on the agenda or nothing else that I can think of that we need to do tonight.
Okay, thank you. The time is now 6:47 p.m. on the June 23rd, 2022 meeting of the Energy Facility Siting Council is now recessed until tomorrow morning at 8:30 a.m. Thank you, everyone. Christopher, great job as always.
Thank you, Chris.